Hey everyone! Today I thought that I would kind of backtrack since I feel like you guys are really getting to know me and getting a sense of really who I am. And today I actually filmed the Nikki Goes Blonde Part 2, and I feel like that's definitely showing the fun side of me and crazy side of me, but then there's also this other side of me that is such a huge part of my life, and that is my autoimmune illness. And I really feel like it's in some ways shaped and molded who I am as a person and kind of my thought process. And I felt like it was time to kind of just go back and kind of explain my symptoms and kind of my history and everything. um, I was actually born to my mom, who had me at almost 16. My biological father passed away before I was born on a motorcycle accident. And the only reason why I bring this up is because autoimmune illnesses tend to run in the family, and it's a lot of times a genetic thing. Not always, but a lot of times if somebody has an autoimmune illness, then it kind of trickles down. And we don't really know too much of my biological father's side. However, as time has gone on, we've really realized that it's come from my mom's side, because a lot of people have ended up with autoimmune illnesses. Not the same thing as me, but just similar autoimmune illnesses like alopecia and lupus, which similar, and mine, and then also a few other things, but those are just a couple. So that's just kind of like background on that. And I wanted to start out when I was 8 years old, was the first time that I became sick. And I actually just had kind of normal symptoms, fever, sore throat, that kind of whole thing. So my mom brought me in, and she, we just thought it was something normal. And they actually told me that I had strep throat. And I was sent home with antibiotics, and the same thing. It's like strep throat, it stings, but then after like 2 days of antibiotics, like, you're fine. So I think got a little bit better, and then not too long afterwards I broke out in a weird rash and a high fever, and I couldn't move. And needless to say, this was kind of like an ongoing thing for probably like a month and a half, and no one really could figure out what in particular it was. At some point they thought I had Kawasaki's disease and Lyme's disease and all these different things, and nobody could kind of pinpoint what it was. So like always in all these years, I was put on prednisone, which is a steroid, and that kind of just shut down my immune system, and then magically I was better. So it went away. And this happened during springtime, which that kind of becomes pivotal, because after age 8, every year around the same time of year, springtime, I would have the same thing: high fever, weird rashes, joint pain. And again, there was no real direct answer of what it was. So I would always be put on steroids, which would take it down. And then by the time I got in to actually see a rheumatologist, nothing really showed. So at some point, I'm sure they just thought me and my mom and everything was crazy, because I looked fine by the time I got there. But it was normally like a month or so before even getting in, and within that month of being on the prednisone, it would take all the inflammation down, and then I looked so much better. So I would say it was probably like that from age 8 until probably around age 15. Then I kind of started to have flares, as they call it, as around the winter time as well. So then it was kind of like I'm gonna flare for a month or so in the winter, and then I'm gonna flare around the springtime. And it was kind of this not joke, but it kind of was a joke because it was like, oh, my mystery illness just likes to show up the same time of year. Like for a while we were like, oh, maybe it's the sun, maybe it's because I'm in the pool, the chlorine chemical, something. But then, like I said, when it started happening more frequently and in the winter, that kind of threw everyone through a loop. Like, what? It doesn't make sense. It was so out of character. So by the time I was 16, and I remember it so vividly actually because I graduated high school early. I was actually homeschooled because that's another thing that you guys don't know is I'm a dancer, and I've danced since age 3, and during high school it was always a huge part of my life, but in high school it became a pretty big thing for me, and I spent many, many hours in the dance studio. So I homeschooled through high school, and then I finished high school early. So going back, I was 16, I had finished high school, and my parents actually decided to go out of town, and I stayed with one of my girlfriends, and one morning we woke up and I had these what almost kind of looked like a bite but more felt like a bruise, and I just assumed they were bug bites. I get mosquito bites. It's always me that gets bit. I don't know why. It's like I have sweet blood, but it's always me. I can be with a huge group of people and I'm the only one that gets mosquito bites. So I just thought I was having some sort of reaction because I'm weird and that tends to happen, and it just felt like a bruise. So I didn't really think too much of it except for the fact that they kept multiplying. So by the time my parents got back into town, my mom saw them and she was like, this does not look right. And so by the time I got to the doctor, I was covered in them, and they were so painful. And they said, obviously this isn't a bug bite. This is well, now we know it's a paniculitis, and it's actually inflammation deep in the fatty tissue. So super, super painful. It feels like I've been hit with a bat and just completely abused. And it kind of looks that way too. So it was another thing that made me really super self-conscious because I had to walk around. Well, truthfully, when it gets so bad, I can't even walk. It's awful. So I was only able to get in to see my pediatrician, so once again, nobody really saw it besides her, and she had kind of been following me through all these years, so she put me on steroids, and immediately it brought it back down. Now, the difference is, this time around, with the medication, it's still, once I was finished with the medication, it came back, and it came back with a vengeance, and I was covered. And so by this point, I was able to get into a rheumatologist, and I was able to see a dermatologist, and they did a biopsy on it, and the rheumatologist saw it, and that's actually when I got the diagnosis of lupus. And they called it lupus paniculitis at the time, and they told me that it was deep, and that's why it was so painful, and it was inflammation in my fatty tissue.